to the very first Security Everywhere learning series. The Security Everywhere learning series is to provide real opportunities for learning and innovations, particularly focused on issues and questions facing information security. The information security team is collaborating with local and national speakers to spotlight emerging trends and allow for a meaningful discussion about topics related to the ever-changing world of information security. So this morning, here in Atlanta, I'm super excited to introduce Roop Singh, technology strategist, blockchain educator, 2 times TED speaker. He's the founder and principal at Intuit Factory, a blockchain business strategy, consulting and education firm. He's delivered, I mentioned, he's delivered 2 TED Talks, one in March 2019, Who Owns Your Digital Identity? Blockchain Unlocking the Identity Revolution. And he followed this up with another one in February 2020, which he was featured on TED.com. How digital assets are changing the nature of value. Roop designs and teaches executives blockchain strategy for business leaders. So he's also about to publish his new book, Profits in Chaos, Blockchain Strategy to Sow and Survive Disruption. That's about to be released soon, so we'll be looking for that. So without any further ado, I'd like to just move straight over, introduce Roop, and say, welcome, Roop. We're very excited to have you here. Thank you for presenting to us.
Thanks for having me, Nick. Can you all hear me well?
Very clearly.
Wonderful. Well, I'm excited to be here. The world is changing, and I'm about to give you a glimpse of how blockchain is eating the world. So let me just set up this presentation, and then we'll get going. Can you guys see my presentation on the screen?
Yes, sir.
Wonderful. So if you've been following the news recently, Coinbase just went IPO through a direct listing. CNBC says Coinbase is unlike any market debut Wall Street has ever seen. Coinbase valued at $76 billion in coming of age moment for cryptocurrency. So you may wonder about these numbers, and you may think that this is highly exuberant market, frothy, some might say. You might wonder about the valuation of Coinbase. In my opinion, this is not merely a valuation that reflects the revenue of Coinbase. If you just look at it in terms of a cryptocurrency exchange, it actually represents an entire ecosystem. It represents the legitimacy and the excitement about this entire ecosystem. So it should not be just looked at as a cryptocurrency exchange whose competitors may come up to be many, and whose only business is through transactional fees, which might come under pressure soon, and it might be a commoditized business. But it should be looked at the first direct listing IPO to legitimize this entire blockchain-based innovation space. In this lecture, we'll look at disruption, the technology way. We'll look at some recent trends. We'll have a basic understanding of what blockchain is so we can ground ourselves in a common shared definition. We'll also look at how blockchain and crypto assets are different. And then we will look at where does blockchain make sense? When can you apply it? When should you apply it? We'll look at a set of principles for you to determine if this is a good use case for blockchain or not. Then we'll look at a couple of strategic frameworks on what can blockchain do for you. And then I'll stick my neck out and give you 8 categories of prediction of where the world is going and where we'll end up. And we'll look at some challenges after that. So just to get the sense of the room, I don't know if you can vote in the chat, but here's the question for you. On a scale of 1 to 5, how well do you understand blockchain as a technology? And then let's just go ahead and vote on that, and then we'll do the second poll. Tracy, is there a way to vote in the chat? You just put the numbers 1 through 5, depending on where you think you are in your understanding of blockchain as a technology.
There is not, Roop, at this time. Sorry, I didn't realize we were going to do a poll.
Okay, well, that's fine. So just assume that you have voted and you can see where you are. It would be good for me to know, but now you know. Here's the second poll. How well do you understand blockchain as a strategy? There's a difference between the two. Moving on. Imagine you were back in the 1800s, namely in 1860s. This is a time of peril in the United States. This is a time of political turmoil. It's a time for upheaval. The Civil War is raging, and at the same time, railways are taking shape. Steam engine has just been invented, and railways are being put together. Around the same time, we used to wonder how was mail, physical paper mail, being sent from one coast of the United States to the other. So it used to take about 25 days to send mail from the Atlantic coast to the Pacific coast using horse buggies. So one day an entrepreneur thought of an idea of changing that. He said, I'm going to set up what is now called the Pony Express. A set of relay riders would ride from one coast to the other, going through difficult terrain in Nevada and Utah and through California to deliver mail. And there'll be a set of 100 or 150 riders. They will change horses every 75 to 100 miles, and they would cover this distance over 2,000 miles. And they could reduce the time to send mail from one coast to the other to 10 days, which was considered remarkable at that time. It was considered a feat of ingenuity, of American ruggedism, of American entrepreneurship. Around the same time, in 1860s, Congress had just passed a law that allowed telegraph to be set up. So telegraph poles were being set up transcontinentally around the United States. In 1862, specifically on October 24th, the first message on a telegraph was sent intercontinentally in the United States. 2 days later, on October 26th, the Pony Express was shut down. It lost $200,000 in that time's money. The telegraph made the Pony Express obsolete. So this is a familiar story. It's a story of technology-led disruption. It's the same story, Netflix versus Blockbuster. It's the same story you hear about retail stores. It's the same story when internet came around and you heard about newspaper and media companies. It's the same story about public publications and books. This is the same story being played out today. Let's look at some trends. JP Morgan, DBS, and Tamask form a new blockchain firm to improve cross-border payments. A $10 million euro digital bond was a CBDC, which is Central Bank Digital Currency test, says the Bank of France. Paxos becomes the third federally regulated crypto bank. So till a few years ago, we used to wonder if crypto would even survive. And here we are, we have 3 companies now that are originally crypto-based companies, and now they're becoming federally regulated banks. So the question for you is, if these crypto-based payments companies are becoming banks, what do banks need to become? China creates its own digital currency, first for a major economy. China launches, which it had been testing for a few years now, a cyber digital crypto-based yuan. And that to me is a direct threat to US dollar as a reserve currency. JP Morgan tests blockchain payments literally out of this world, in space. So if all the infrastructure on this planet Earth was to vanish, we would still have blockchain-based payment through space. PayPal expands into the crypto business in the UK market with Venmo app. So the same way you can send dollars today, you could exchange crypto using your Venmo app in the UK. Here, closer to home, in the United States, MasterCard and Island Pay launches world's first central bank digital currency linked card. And they did it in the pirate territory in Nassau. Now let's turn our eyes into the latest craze, NFTs. An original Banksy has been burned and turned into a non-fungible token. And you wonder what that might be. We'll cover that. Grimes, the artist, sold $6 million worth of digital art. Most of that were short videos. A 10-second video clip is sold for $6.6 million. Now you're wondering what kind of clip you need to make. One of the world's most conservative organizations, the BBC, gets into blockchain tokens with Doctor Who. Good news for Doctor Who fans. And yes, your favorite, Tom Brady, is now launching an NFT company. So let's talk about what is this blockchain that's enabling all these use cases of payments and cryptocurrencies and NFTs. There's a lot of number of different definitions of blockchain. I use a very simple, basic one. Blockchain to me is a cryptographically secured distributed ledger with a shared state. What does that mean? So think about the fact that, let's say there are 100 of us on this live stream and we all live in a village. Let's say we have a set of transactions with each other. We send, let's say I send $50 to Nick, and Nick sends $60 to Tracy, and Tracy sends $100 to Pam, and Pam sends another $100 to Kelly because we love Kelly, so on and so forth. So we have a set of transactions amongst us. Back in the day, when human civilization was starting to record these transactions, we originally recorded them on stone-based ledgers. Literally, we carved these transactions out on stone. I'm talking a few thousand years ago. And then we developed the technology of papyrus, paper. We started recording them on paper-based ledgers. And at that time, we might have been doing it on our own ledger, meaning we would keep a set of a ledger for our own transactions. But the challenge with that is, whose set of ledgers should I trust? Yours, mine, Nick's, Kelly's? Which one? Then we slowly moved into this model of giving that trust to a third party, also known as a bank, a clearinghouse. And we said, okay, we will not worry about keeping our own transactions, but we will allow you to keep the transactions. You monitor all of these transactions, and we will believe the version of truth that you tell us. Whenever we have a discrepancy, we want to know which transaction was done when and for how much, we will come to you and you will tell us that. And that is essentially a centralized ledger version that we had been following for a long time, for a few thousand years. Now we're thinking of another model, which is actually quite similar to the old model. We said, okay, metaphorically, let's say that we have these transactions, and the moment a transaction occurs, let's publish this transaction onto a shared wall in this village. Anybody who's in this village can come and look at that wall and will know the version of truth, the state of transactions at that moment immediately. There will be no doubt, there will be no discrepancy, there will be no reason or purpose to reconcile, because there's nothing to reconcile these set of transactions to. All it is a shared wall that we all can see at the same time, and we believe that this is the version of the truth now. And that, in essence, is blockchain. So think about the fact that we are now creating our own individual ledgers, but they are shared. It has a shared state, as in a shared wall, as a metaphor. So if you break down how does blockchain function, it's quite basic, in fact. We use a distributed ledger in the way I just explained, and then we use encryption, essentially mathematical functions, which had existed for a long time. In fact, both of these technologies, so to say, the distributed ledger technologies, had existed since we developed the internet. And encryption has existed since we have fought wars for a few hundred years. and we have perfected encryption in a lot of ways, even before this use of encryption was found. So essentially, blockchain is just distributed ledger plus encryption, which was first put together in, so think that these ingredients existed before, but now they were just put together in a use case for a peer-to-peer cash transaction in Bitcoin by a pseudonym called Satoshi Nakamoto. We don't know if this is a man or a woman or a group of people, but this white paper was published in 2008, where these ingredients were put together to form a peer-to-peer global transaction system where there is no need for a third party called the bank. So here's a fun fact. Did you know that here in the United States, a class of asset known as gold was actually illegal for investment till as soon or as early as 1974. So the point is that over a course of time, new class of assets emerge, and it takes a while for us to accept in a consensus way that this is a new class of assets. And that's what we're seeing with crypto assets these days. A basic distinction. Crypto assets or cryptocurrencies are just one use case of a foundational technology called blockchain. If you listen to the media, you might equate the two or conflate the two, and most people think of blockchain only in the context of cryptocurrencies, and that too only in the context of popular ones like Bitcoin or Ethereum. But the fact is, it is just one use case of a foundational technology, and a foundational technology that has a number of use cases we'll look at in a minute. So here is a way to segregate them and to understand them better. There are cryptocurrency-based use cases like Bitcoin and Ethereum, or Bitcoin Cash, Litecoin, or Stellar, and there are over 5,600 cryptocurrencies at the moment by my last count. Then we can have crypto-based assets, which are not currencies, but they're tokenized assets of other existing assets. For instance, fine art could be tokenized into a non-fungible token, becoming a crypto-based asset, or collectible cards like baseball cards or Doctor Who cards, as we looked at a minute ago, or real estate. Every real estate that you encounter, your house, the building you live, the building you might go to as an office, or even equity or securities like shares and bonds can be tokenized into crypto-based assets. And then we have more industry-based use cases. So there's a number of use cases in agriculture, in automotive, in financial services, in healthcare, and insurance, etc. If I give you a list, you would find that there are over 50 use cases and perhaps even over 100 use cases in industries where blockchain is disrupting those spaces. So the question becomes, and I get asked these very often in companies and when I teach in universities, when does blockchain make sense? When should we use it? What defines a good blockchain use case? So these are 8 set of principles that you can use to understand if blockchain is an appropriate use case for your business. The way I look at it, blockchain to me forces automation. I come from a world of business process improvement, business process management. So to me, the interesting and exciting part for blockchain was that we had been trying to automate and improve inefficient processes for a while now using different old school techniques. But what blockchain does, it forces you to automate. It forces you to figure out who do you want in this supply chain, in this network, who adds value. It forces you to put those players together and get them to agree to a consensus mechanism of these set of transactions. And then when we publish those transactions, they're visible to everybody in that network or that value chain immediately at the same time. So it takes away the need for centralized or individual databases-based systems, and it automates the inefficient processes. To me, blockchain is business process automation. Authenticity. One aspect of blockchains, which we haven't discussed thus far, is as soon as the transaction is published, they're considered to be immutable. They cannot be changed, altered, or removed, which gives us auditability, meaning we can go back to the transaction at any moment and find out when it was done and who the parties were of that transaction and for how much. It gives us provenance. And this is a central feature of blockchain that allows us to trust the chain and the data in it. Decentralization. As we discussed before, this is a move towards decentralization away from centralization. So you can think of decentralization in two ways. One is network-based decentralization, meaning computer networks and where data is stored. The second way to think about it is social networks-based decentralization. So an example of that would be when YouTube first came around, the idea of creating content only resided with a few movie studios before YouTube or Instagram made it common for everybody to become a content creator in their own right. It's a social decentralization. Same way as Twitter made everybody a news or opinion maker, which the authority of that only lied with certain news organizations before that. Disintermediation, cut out the middleman. So, as I said before, the fact that blockchain is a network and everybody who's on the network can see the transactions, then you must wonder who should be part of the network. If you're developing this ecosystem or this network from scratch, then you can allow certain people to be on the network and not allow people who don't add value. There are a lot of companies that are intermediaries, and those intermediaries will be disrupted. They will be removed. And if you are one of them, you need to wonder about that. You need to think, how are consumers getting closer to the source of value? What value is being added by each entity within that network? Proof of ownership. Who owns this land? Who owns this house? For that matter, who owns any asset? So this may not be relevant or as obvious in developed countries, but in certain developing countries, you would know that where is this record of land stored, or this record of this house? Maybe the house was passed on hereditary through your ancestry. So say the grandfather passed the house to the father, and father passed the house, or sorry, the great grandfather passed the house to the grandfather passed the house to the father passes the house to the son or the daughter. So the question becomes, where is this record stored? Typically, they have been stored in physical paper-based ledgers in some dusty warehouse in some dark corner somewhere in a municipal or a county type office. And it's very easy to change that. You can just erase somebody's name and put somebody else's name, and boom, now you own the house. How do we maintain a proof of ownership and the rights of usage, of rights of ownership of that asset in a way that they can be transferred and recorded easily? Because of immutability and provenance, blockchains allow us a way for proof of ownership. And in the same way, they allow us a proof of authorship. Whose idea is this? So think of music videos, think of movies, think of songs. Back in the day, only record companies could define who was the creator of the song. They would give credit to that artist, and that's who got the royalties. That too, very few royalties, but still, they were the label creator. So the question is on intellectual property, any kind of intellectual property, how can we record the authorship of that intellectual property? And blockchain allows us a way to do that. Eventually, this leads to transparency. Transparency is literally the ability to see through. So there is no opaqueness. Anybody who's authorized can go and see through these transactions over a course of time. And that is something that brings us trust. So transparency and trust in an increasingly automated world. So think about this. More and more people are coming online on the internet in the world. More and more devices in an IoT or a autonomous devices type way are coming online. And we need to have a way of trust between humans and devices and other humans in an increasingly automated world. And blockchain allows for a way to do that. So I also think of blockchain in a way that it allows for trust, but in a more efficient manner. So to me, we still create trust today. Business happens today. We have created trust for a number of years. And we've done business and commerce and trade for a number of years. But the question is, at what cost? So blockchain to me is a more cost-efficient way of creating this trust. And when I talk of cost, I mean cost in terms of networks, in terms of computation power, in terms of human resources, and in terms of processing time. So take a look at these 8 principles. Whenever somebody comes to you and say, hey, is this a good use case for blockchain? Apply these 8 principles, and the more principles you satisfy, the more value proposition you will see of blockchain in that particular use case. So take a moment to look at that. A blockchain to me is merely more than yet another technology. To me, it is a strategy. So here are a couple of frameworks to think about blockchain in a very strategic way. What can blockchain do for you? On one end, there are tactical uses of blockchain. You could replace your old legacy stack, reduce technical debt. You can automate your inefficient processes. You can reconfigure partner relationships across the supply chain, and that's when you start getting into more strategic land. And you can deploy a shared layer of trust amongst those supply chain partners. Or you can reinvent new products, get into new markets, and create deeper engagements with consumers. Or you can be very strategic and redraw verticals, enable new business models, and frankly, enable new markets. Here's another view of what blockchain can do for you. You can reduce infrastructure and transaction costs. You can automate transactions or authenticate and protect transactions. You can protect intellectual property. You can monitor and verify any asset, be it physical or digital assets, chain of custody. Or you could even create new assets and transfer those assets. There are a number of industries in this path. There is in my longer course called Blockchain Strategy for Business Leaders, we go through this game called Blockchain Bingo. I ask the students, tell me an industry, and I'll tell you a use case for blockchain. So think about everything that you interact with in your home life or in your business life, and you will see that blockchain has applications in almost all of those areas. But blockchain alone is not enough. The way I see it, the new technology paradigm, a new technology stack is emerging. There will be a blockchain-based platform at the bottom to deploy a shared layer of trust or to safely and securely share data. Then we'll have smart contract technologies to automate business logic. And on top of that, we will interact with augmented and virtual reality technologies. We will interact with artificial intelligence and IoT. And data analytics and business intelligence. I'm sorry, this should say IoT in here. So that is the emerging stack of business applications in my mind. So here we are at some predictions. I'm going to make these 8 category of predictions, and I may not go into depth in each one of them, but you can read a few here. And then I'm going to ask you, do you think they will come true? So here are some predictions. Your favorite topic, payments. All trade finance and retail payments are executed on smart contracts and blockchain-based payment infrastructure. Now, this infrastructure is distinct. These are different payment rails than existing SWIFT or ACH or any kind of bank-to-bank transfer infrastructure that we have currently. Digital assets, or everything you see around you, be it physical or virtual. For instance, all the goods in a video game are monetized as tokenized blockchain-based digital assets, and they're traded on peer-to-peer exchanges. Tokenized securities, every class of asset that exists, be it stocks or shares or bonds or real estate or commodities, are essentially converted into tokenized blockchain-based digital security traded on both public and private markets as a peer-to-peer exchange. Web 3.0, there is a whole new set of protocols and algorithms coming to replace the old technology stack of Web 2.0. Accounting as a function is basically performed on distributed ledger-based platforms. Chain of asset custody, you'll be able to track any asset, be it produce, be it diamonds, be it, let's say, airlines parts, be it any kind of data on a blockchain-based platform. And distributed ledgers become more efficient and are the underlying secure data sharing layers for critical IoT and autonomous device data. Identity. All forms of identity are stored or enabled, be it government issued identity or company issued identity, biometric identity, genetic identity, are managed through blockchain-based platforms with the value system of self-sovereignty. We move towards an era where users have more control and consent over their data. Blockchains become de facto registry for intellectual property. All title rights, be it your cars or your phones or your real estate or art or music or movies, all of these are managed on blockchain-enabled platforms. Architecture of money is changing. Central banks issue their own digital or blockchain-based cryptocurrencies like digital yuan or digital ruble or digital dollar. And as a consumer, we have an option to use them in addition to fiat currencies, which we use today. But remember that these are issued and used on a completely different and new set of infrastructure and payment rails. The race to establish a stable digital currency for the internet, like a stable coin or even a CDBC, is a threat to US dollar being a reserve currency, and it's a major risk. And it is caused by, and it also in turn fuels more geopolitical power struggles between governments and private companies who are issuing these currencies. One example of that would be Facebook announcing Libra a couple of years ago, which is now rebranded into Diem. So imagine if you could use Diem on Facebook app using their messenger to buy and sell products. Why would you need US dollar? Decentralized finance. We have evolved from an era of fintech, which is essentially transfer of money on the internet using old school rails, as you are very familiar with, to decentralized finance, transfer of value on blockchain-based networks. So crypto-based services crypto-based networks offer DeFi services like lending and remittance and trading and yield farming and derivatives. These are regulated and thriving markets. And this year, 2021, has been a major breakthrough year for all of these DeFi type applications. Crypto-based financial services rails are formed, and these are new markets that are thriving as an alternative to traditional financial infrastructure with new set of players. That's the important part to remember. So we move from an era of internet of information to transferring value on networks on an internet of value. So take a moment, and I know you can't poll, but just think for a second to yourself, how much do you believe Roop's predictions will come true? Option one, Roop is off his rockers and he hasn't taken his meds this morning and something needs to be done about him. Two, they're unlikely. Three, some will come true. Four, most will come true. 5, I'm aligned with this vision, and all of them would come true. And I know you can't vote right now, but feel free to reach out to me and tell me what you think about it. So here's something I wrote about blockchain in 2017 in an article called Blockchain, Why Does It Matter? This is essentially jumbled set of high-sounding words to make me seem smarter than I actually am. So feel free to read it. Okay, now that you have absorbed that, let's move on. It is not all rainbows and sunshine. There are challenges. What are those? Now, scalability is a challenge that's often made a boogeyman when people criticize or are skeptics of blockchain. My opinion is the following. We have solved scalability in blockchains, depending on the use case you want to talk about. There is a lot of capacity available in blockchains. The challenge in this discussion is most people in a contemporary fashion, they talk about scalability, but what they're really talking about is Bitcoin blockchain specifically. Now, as I told you, there are over 5,600 cryptocurrencies that work on certain blockchains, and then there are other blockchain networks that are not cryptocurrencies. So depending on your use case, we have solved for scalability. So if for instance, you have an identity-based use case, it doesn't need to be highly scalable in terms of throughput. And we have blockchains to enable such use cases. So depends on which use case you talk about. Technology maturity. We are now in the second phase of evolution, if you will. So if you count from 2008 to, let's say, 2020 being the first phase, and now we're starting the second phase in 2021, the rate of innovation in this space is very high. So the blockchain protocols, which I think are still in their middle school, are improving and improving rapidly. Smart contract platforms are improving rapidly. And we haven't even seen very successful applications yet, but I believe in the next 3 to 5 years, we will see them as the rate of innovation, especially from the startup ecosystem, is very high in this space. Security. So I never say blockchain cannot be ever hacked. Blockchains to me are tamper resistant. They're more difficult to hack just because of the way they're designed and their architecture and the game theoretic aspects that are implemented mostly in public blockchains. But yet there is still this question of, can it be hacked? And if you put a target on something, a lot of bad actors will try to hack it. We don't have much standardization yet, and there is a regulatory risk. Every country will choose on how they want to regulate or view this innovation. I wrote an article in 2018, I believe, one country's ban is another country's boom. So it depends on everybody's politics and their viewpoint. Some countries will look at this as new innovation to drive their GDP growth and attract a new set of players, attract new companies, attract new talent to their jurisdictions. And some will look at this as a way to move away from traditional or existing systems and existing processes, and they would try to restrain or restrict that. The markets are maturing. I think this year has been a breakthrough year, as I said before, but yet there are too many players in the market solving for similar use cases, and we will see a lot of consolidation. And in the next 5 years, we will see a lot of M&A activity for that consolidation. I think this, we can say that specifically for crypto currencies, mainstream adoption is happening in 2021, but not for a lot of other use cases. Maybe for NFTs, which are just starting to emerge as a new toy for people to adopt. So adoption is happening, but slowly, and there'll be adoption curve would be different for each of these predictions that I've made and each of these use cases that we discussed. So the question for you is, this is a fun game. It's exciting. You can watch this game being played on your screens and enjoy the plays and get tickled or entertained by it watching the game as spectators. Or you can jump into the field and be the player creating the plays. The choice is yours. I did mention this course. So there's a course I teach in various formats called Blockchain Strategy for Business Leaders. You can look at the format. It's a very intensive, comprehensive 4-day program. And it has 13, and there's a surprise module too. There's 14 modules now. And the interesting part about this course is that it is not purely technical or not purely business. It's a very multidisciplinary course, which is what I believe is needed to understand the space. And when I first got started, I had challenge with that, and I didn't find any program that would satisfy that need. So I basically put together the things that I had to learn to really appreciate what's happening in the space. So if you look at these modules, we start with market dynamics, but then we have a lot of core technology modules about DLTs and cryptography and blockchain architecture and smart contracts. And then we go and understand disruption models, innovation models. We look at identity and privacy. We look at various use cases in blockchain in the enterprise for a number of industries like financial services, payments, insurance, gaming, media, supply chain, you name it. Then we look at tokenizations and digital assets, talk about NFTs and all kinds of digital assets you could create. And then we talk about how you might develop your ecosystem, because without that, your innovation will not be adopted. Then we give you certain proprietary frameworks to evaluate blockchain companies and tell you the factors that matter more than other factors. Then we bring you together in teams to design blockchain-based use cases and then convert them into business models in this module. Then we discuss, as a bonus, whose currency is it anyways. We talk about stable currencies and CDBCs, and we look at the impact it might have on the traditional payment infrastructure and the payment business segment. So just giving you an overview of that course. If you're interested, we can talk more about that later. As Nick mentioned, I've been working on this book for about 3 years now. And Dr. Ben Kaczynski here at Emory University in Atlanta has been very gracious to encourage me and be an advisor and a brainstorming partner to clarify my own thoughts. And he has been very gracious to write the foreword for the book. The book is called Profits in Chaos: Blockchain Strategy to Sow and Survive Disruption. So you can go on the website profitsinchaos.com and sign up for discounts and release updates. Happy to continue this conversation. Take down this link tree. You will find my talks like these, over 50 hours of video content on our site, including the 2 TEDx talks that Nick mentioned, the book website, the articles I've written, and all other background details about me. So feel free to keep in touch on LinkedIn. Thank you, everybody. Nick, over to you.
Well, thank you so much for that, Roop. That was just phenomenal, insightful. And for the record, I am a 5.
Okay. Wonderful.
I buy into the vision. I do have a question for you.
Please.
When I look at this, from an InfoSec point of view, what role do you see blockchain playing? I don't know, I'm going to put you on the spot with this question, but
no, fair.
What role do you see blockchain technology playing in a zero trust architecture?
Yeah. So if you think of just the basic idea of blockchains, they're more resistant to tampering. So let's go back to the number of hacks or compromises we've been hearing over the last 5 years, be it Equifax or be it Facebook's compromise, or be it in the US, the federal government's employee medical records compromise, or be it Target or Home Depot before that. I mean, we can keep counting, right? So the basic issue there is the way they store their information. And most of the world has followed and keeps continuing to follow a centralized way of storing data. And data could be any kind of data. And I believe that that model itself is faulty. And we need to now go into a distributed model of storage, which at least protects us. And even if one part of the data or one part of the storage is compromised, we still have other parts which the bad actors cannot attract, or cannot compromise. So I think blockchain will help in that regard. I think we need to move to that model where critical data is not stored in a centralized fashion, and blockchains are either used to store it or to even authenticate data, and the data is stored in a much more distributed and a decentralized fashion. So that's one aspect of security. The other aspect of security is think about messaging and encryption. So as I said, blockchain essentially is distributed ledger plus encryptions. So there are a lot of companies developing messaging applications, or essentially message sharing applications, like we see in WhatsApp, right? So there's a whole recent hoopla about WhatsApp changing its privacy policy, and in the pandemic, we talked about Zoom not being end-to-end encrypted, and there was a whole story around that. So I think blockchain also has a solution for messaging using a better form of encryption and end-to-end encryption, using blockchain as an underlying platform for that kind of use case.
Makes sense. Really does. I don't know what, Tracy, are we able to take any questions? I don't know that we can do that in the stream.
No, we can't with the streaming.
The only option we have is if they want to send a question to me in chat, then I can relay it back.
That would be, so yeah, if anyone's got a question, could they send that to Tracy Evans? And I do have, if I may, one more question, and that is, are we at what Malcolm Gladwell would call a tipping point? Are we there?
Yeah. I think 2021 is the tipping point. So, when I used to talk about these technologies a few years ago, there was always this lingering question of, well, nothing's been successful. Show me a practical use case that other users are using, et cetera, et cetera. I think somehow 2021 has done a few things. One, sadly, because of the pandemic, digitization has accelerated. We know that already. We know that digitization was going to happen. It wasn't a surprise, but maybe what was supposed to happen in maybe 5 or 7 years happened in a year or a year and a half. And that has accelerated a lot of these use cases. The other aspect is Coinbase going direct listing, IPO, has established the market for startups in the space. It has established valuations. It has established, you may agree or disagree with them, but the fact is that happened. It has established multiples. It has established an exit route. It has made the space more legitimate and more real for a lot of people. So a lot of institutional money, if you just look at the data, a lot of institutional money has flown into the space in the last 2 years. And these were players who were wondering about the space, monitoring it, and thinking of getting in, but they just hadn't pulled the trigger yet. And this is the precipitating event for them. And same is the case for DeFi platforms, and same is the case for NFT platforms. I mean, suddenly, and a lot of people say maybe DeFi and particularly NFT is a bubble. It's another tulip mania. I don't think so. I think it has a lot of challenges in terms of technology, but we will solve those challenges. That's how technology evolves. And the good news is that we find more and more people getting into the game, either as users or as creators, as artists, as buyers and sellers, collectors of these NFTs. So this year has definitely been a tipping.
So we do have a couple of questions coming through.
Yep.
The first one is, where do you see TSYS implementing blockchain technology in our business process?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear that well. Where do I see what?
Where do you see TSYS implementing blockchain technology in our business process?
What's TSYS?
So TSYS is the issue
we acquired.
So TSYS is the issuing arm of Global Payments. And it was recently acquired in was merged. How long ago was it? 14 months ago now, I think.
Okay.
And so it really increased. It really increased the size of the company. So now Global Payments really has both sides of the business. It has the issuing side of the business. Sorry, it has the acquiring side of the business. It has the issuing side of the business. So it's no longer just a merchant acquirer.
Okay. Yeah. So unfortunately, I'm not inside Global Pay, so I will not comment on that. And my response to that would be, that's a question for Global Pay to figure out. The world is shifting around them. Do you want to be spectators or do you want to be players? And if so, how?
Okay.
No, yeah.
Another question. It says, what do you predict will happen the first time the chain is compromised? Will the trust model collapse completely and leave this in the digital trash heap of history?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think that will be the case. And thankfully, till today, not any of the major chains have not been compromised. So you might be surprised to know that there are chains that have been compromised till date, but they're not the major ones that we use or interact with, right? And the thing to think about is the following. A lot of these chains, new ones coming out, are not effectively decentralized, meaning they don't have enough nodes to support them yet. So if you have 10 nodes supporting a chain, somebody could come up with a hash power greater than 5 of those nodes and then take over that chain. It's not that difficult to do that. The reason chains like Bitcoin and Ethereum and others are not compromised is because that they are very decentralized. There are thousands of nodes, and to take over them would require hash power that is not practical for any one party to amass, unless it happens to be a nation state that determined to collapse chain. And that risk will always exist. But my point of view is that there are chains that have been compromised. It depends on the architecture and the net decentralization of that chain. And the model has not fallen through. The other thing to think about is not all chains are the same, meaning architecturally, a Bitcoin blockchain is very different than an Ethereum blockchain. Is quite different from, let's say, a Stellar blockchain or EOS blockchain. So when you start getting into the space, you start seeing these nuances, and especially when you start designing solutions, you'll understand the distinction in architectures, and then you will optimize the architecture for a particular type of use case, what you want the chain to be best for. And in that case, there could be chains that are not very optimized for security, although they still have the basic attributes of blockchains being more secure than centralized systems. So I don't think that it will fall into a trap and we will just abandon the whole space. Let's say a chain gets compromised, we will evaluate the architectural reasons behind that compromise. Yeah, go ahead.
Can I contribute to that? Yeah. Isn't that really, I think your architecture point is well made. It's the difference between a public blockchain and a permission blockchain.
There's a huge difference.
So the opportunity to take over a public blockchain with limited number of nodes is much proportionally greater than the risk of a permissioned or private blockchain with the same number of nodes being taken over. And it's an architectural question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would change one word in your description. When you talk about permission-based chains, you cannot equate them with the same number of nodes as a public chain by definition. Private chains are much less decentralized, and hence the reason that they are private by definition, right? So, but the fact remains that it is harder to compromise a private permission-based chain just because you have chosen the players you want to be there. You have chosen the players that have nodes. And you've chosen the players, and apparently there is a level of trust there already, hence they wouldn't be part of that network. That's point one. Point two would be what would be the motivation to compromise such change? So we need to get into that, talking about permission-based change. The discussion on permission versus public is very exciting, and we can talk an hour on that. And this is a very similar discussion to when internet first came around and companies were talking about intranets versus this public intranet. They said, oh, we cannot open up our network and our data to the public internet. We must only use intranets. And there were a lot of such instances in the 90s or the 2000s where there were just these intranets within companies, and maybe some aspects were open to a public internet. So it's a similar discussion to that in that context.
Okay, next question. We have many people are adverse to the blockchain because of the anonymity it provides its users. How can the blockchain tech be used to protect against cybercrime?
Yeah, so I will counter that and say many people like the idea of blockchain because it provides the anonymity. It just depends on your point of view, where you sit, right? Point one. Point two, not all blockchains are anonymous, and this is a misnomer. So even Bitcoin blockchain is pseudo-anonymous, not fully anonymous. And because of that, people who like the privacy part designed more privacy-preserving blockchains like Zcash. There's a number of them that you can look at. So to answer your question, the model of privacy is changing itself. The purpose and reason behind privacy is changing itself. I would say that we are less private now because any company that stores my data can't keep it safe. They just can't do it. Tell me a company that's been able to keep my data safe. I mean, I personally have been compromised multiple times because my data is either in Home Depot or Facebook or Target or Equifax or any one of these folks, right? So where's that privacy? It's gone. What privacy are you talking about? So one question I ask, especially to my friends in the Silicon Valley, and while I'm researching for the book, is privacy dead? Should we not even have that expectation? That's one aspect. The other way to think about blockchains and privacy is the following. Blockchains actually offer the only real solution for privacy preserving and user control and user consent. And for a deeper discussion on that, I would suggest you to look at my first TEDx talk, which was titled, Who Owns Your Digital Identity? And therein I talk about these the same factors, and I lay out a solution how blockchains could be used for privacy preserving while maintaining user control and user authorization.
Right, and then we have one last question.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, we're at time. So
we got 2 minutes. We got 2 minutes. We're good. Go ahead, Tracy. We'll just slide this one in.
This would be used in some industry as an example in banking, but what are more unusual examples, use cases in less obvious industries, say in agriculture?
Yep. So I'll give you an agriculture use case. In fact, I've been just recently exploring this one. So think about the fact that you own a farm, and the farm, we can put sensors in the farm, which are essentially IoT devices and specific kinds of sensors. So the sensors record all the activity, or the atmospheric and soil activity in the farm. And then we can use models to evaluate how much carbon offset has the farm done. And we can turn those carbon offsets into tokens that the farmers could then sell or trade in a peer-to-peer carbon offset exchange and actually get value or digital money, digital dollars, or any kind of currency for their carbon offsets. That's one example. Here's another one. Think about tracking fish. Let's say there's a restaurant that offers fish to their customers, and their customers are very discerning. They need to know exactly where the fish was caught, what was the temperature, how long did it take, what is the other parameters around the fish. So same story. You can have sensors that figure out where the fish was caught and record that activity, starting from a river or the ocean where it was caught, and track that set of activity right down to the table. And you can then display that just using a QR code. And in fact, the same use case applies for organic produce. How do you define what is organic? by the nature of the way it was farmed. So you could do the stream, farm to table, asset tracking use case. Okay, go ahead, Nick.
No, I just want to say we've reached the top of the hour. To Kelly's point, to the person who asked that question, I'd say I'd refer them to Walmart, who are using blockchain to track fresh produce.
Yep.
And I can provide details about that. Kelly, go ahead.
Everyone, thank you so much for joining, and we very much look forward to having you join our next one that will be held in June. And Roop, I cannot thank you enough for your willingness to kick off our inaugural season of our Security Everywhere learning service. Thank you so much, and I hope everyone has a fantastic rest of your day. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me, folks, and feel free to keep in touch and continue the dialogue on LinkedIn. Happy to talk. Take care. Be well.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Good night.
Take care. Thanks, Kelly.